Ben, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on. I'm always happy to talk to you, Earl, and especially things like uniforms and just kind of the nerdery that is associated with it sometimes.
When I think of jerseys, I know it's always great to talk about the glory days of the 70s and 80s when it's really, really colorful, especially when TV's really hitting the forefront. I know that, of course, the first season of color television officially by all the networks was 1966, and I think
Yeah.
everybody started taking advantage of that with the funky colors. But one
Mhm.
of the things I really noticed, everybody has a favorite jersey design if you're a sports fan. And even if it's soccer or baseball or basketball or football, there's just a certain particular color scheme and design that when you think of that team, that pretty much is a good identifier for that team.
Yeah, I think nostalgia plays a really big part, especially now. I feel like we're in the heyday of nostalgia, really. And it's really struck me, I think, lately because I'm just getting older and to the point where uniforms and things that I grew up when they were new, they're being retroed now and the throwbacks. So I've really gotten back into the NBA because of the restart and everything like that. And really, my interest got kind of rekindled with The Last Dance and, watching all the old footage of Michael Jordan and all those NBA 90s teams because, that's the kind of era I grew up watching and everything like that. And simultaneously, I get a kick out of seeing, like the Raptors and the Grizzlies and the Utah Jazz playing in their 90s throwbacks. I mean, I think over the weekend, I think the Raptors and Memphis matched up. And, the Raptors were wearing the Jurassic Park dinosaur pinstripes from the Marcus Camby, Damon Stoudemire era. Yeah. And, the Grizzlies, the teal one, that's, Mike Bibby, Big Country Reeves, Sharif Abdul-Rahim. And it's funny, I didn't really like those uniforms when I was a kid, but now I'm kind of into them. And I think part of it is just the nostalgia. I mean, that's the thing that sucks. It's I keep going on the NBA store because I kind of want a Ja Morant Memphis Grizzlies throwback jersey, but they don't sell them. They're not available right now. Same thing with maybe trying to pick up a Raptors jersey or something like that, or even it's way before my era, but Vince Carter, the photos and last kind of footage I keep seeing of Vince Carter pre-retirement, he was playing in a Hawks throwback, I think in the Lou Hudson. So this is like the 1960s or late 50s era. So it's like powder blue and red colors that they just don't do anymore, and it's nowhere to be found. So.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of designs and color schemes I really think that are synonymous with particular teams, and then you see teams go to a different color scheme and not see as big of a reaction, and then they eventually go back to the original color scheme in some variation. I mean, there's plenty of examples. You can look at the Wizards. That's one example. The Brewers, that's a prime example. There's so many more that I can't think of off the top of my head.
I think the biggest one right now, they were really clamoring for it for a long time, and they finally did it, was the Padres, going back to the brown. I mean, they've really wanted that for a while, and it's pretty distinctive. I mean, there's not many other, besides, I guess, the Browns, there's not many teams with a brown and gold kind of color scheme, and it works for them.
Yeah, and I even think about the throwback Broncos uniforms, the early days Orange Crush and Blue, where they were sort of the San Diego Padres with their brown and yellow. It's weird. You don't really think of, like you said, not many teams have brown in their predominant color scheme.
Yeah. But you're right. I think we mentioned off air, I think you called it, uniforms, they come in cycles, right? The Phillies, their alternates, the 70s style with that stylized P, kind of the Mike Schmidt era. They're back, they finally brought them back after they switched over to that kind of Richie Ashburn 1950s style, which they've worn for a long time. And then their alternates with the blue hat and the cream, that was like from, 1940s. That was the uniform previous to that. And now, I guess there's a nostalgia for those 70s and early 80s teams, the one that won the World Series back in 1980. And Mike Schmidt, Tug McGraw, those guys, Sarge, Gary Matthews. So it's interesting just to see it all come back. I mean, the Orioles are another prime example. They went a long time without the cartoon bird, and then they brought it back. I guess first Baltimore, getting that back on the jersey, and then just going full cartoon bird for the last. It came back in 2012, and it's a coincidence that they got good again after that, but I'm sure it didn't hurt them at all.
Yeah, when you think about a lot of teams who go through a rebranding, all of a sudden there's that bump into sustainability and success. You just think about the Titans. Once they changed their uniform from the Oilers, once they did their rebranding, that propelled them to the Super Bowl. The Orioles were on a run. I'm trying to think of a few others who had success. I know it's not always a guarantee that when you switch your colors that in your uniforms and change your style that all of a sudden it's going to propel you to success, because then it looks like same old team, new coat of paint, so to say.
Yeah, I think there probably is a marketing thing to it. I mean, I'm thinking like the Astros, late 80s, early 90s, they finally kind of moved away from the Tequila Sunrise kind of rainbow thing, and they went to kind of a modernized thing, and that kind of coincided with them getting good again. Jeff Bagwell went on an MVP run, and Craig Biggio, Cam Minetti, the Killer Bees, and Darryl Kyle and Mike Hampton. Same thing. I mean, most of the time, and that's most of the time what happens is that the team will change uniforms, and they get good. It's really rare that they'll do it afterwards, but I don't know what it is. There's just something that you get a little mojo to it, and it works for some reason.
Same thing with the Orioles. 89 Orioles. They went from that 70s style uniform that they were running pretty much till 88 that season, and then coincidentally, the change of the logo, the change of the uniform style, they ended up having the Why Not season and having a bit of a run, and then again, it's interestingly enough, us being Orioles fans, we would notice some of the small changes that went on, even from 94 to 95 when they went to the different color style and the lack of piping on the sleeves, where it's orange, Orioles in orange on home, it went to a black with orange trim and things like that. Just little things that people may notice, and I'll admit I've seen some color schemes that I feel like maybe fit the team, but just going back to a similar look would probably be better, or similar maybe script on their jerseys. I always think, for example, the Sacramento Kings. I know they're not going back to red, white, and blue anymore. I've pretty much been resigned to the fact they've been almost 25 years with that purple and silver and black, all those colors. But I feel like if you have the old Kansas City, early Sacramento script, it's a perfect blend of both the old and the new.
Yeah. The NBA is different because normally, like most sports teams, you have a home jersey, you have an away jersey, you have maybe an alternate jersey. The NBA is different because all the uniforms aren't even designated as home. It's, it's association and classic and those kind of things, which is a little sad, just because you could flip on the game before and you can tell who's home and away because, like in baseball, usually the home team will be on whites and the road team will be gray or something like that. We went and turned on a Lakers game, okay, they're wearing yellow, or if it's Sunday, they'll wear white, so they're home, and then purple's on the road. But it's all mixed mash now, which is interesting. And I guess it kind of refreshes things, but I don't know, maybe just as an old fogey, it was nice to be able to rely on that. I mean, tastes change. I think what Oregon was doing in football for a long time, and all these alternate jerseys in college football and everything like that, they do it because, not to sound old, but they say that's what the kids like. They didn't grow up on, Notre Dame, the gold helmet and the navy jersey and the gold pants. So when Notre Dame goes green or, Oregon does their weird color scheme, highlight or yellow, whatever, it's cool to them.
Yeah, and I think especially it's starting to rub off on things like Maryland, and you look at an example like that. I like the Maryland flag, as I call it, the Crossland cross of the Calvert colors on the helmets that they normally play with. Especially, it's a welcome change from what we used to see in the 80s and during the Boomer Esiason and Frank Reich era, where it was just Terps. Maybe it might have been Terps in the mid 90s up to the 2000s, but maybe they had M on their helmets as well. But I think those things are sort of a welcome change.
Yeah, I mean, again, sometimes it's nice just to mix it up a little bit, I mean, as much as, we kind of pined for the cartoon bird for a long time, but now we're to the point, and, I love those hats, but, I also have a nostalgia for, the original Oriole bird when they switched the first time, so 89, you mentioned the Why Not squad, and that specific bird, not the one that was a little bit more detailed afterwards, but It just comes in waves, I guess. But with Washington's uniforms and everything like that, the football team, kind of being up in the air. Out of the new designs that were floating around, do you kind of favor one or the other? Warriors, Red Tails, Red Wolves, that kind of thing?
Looking at some of the feedback from different people who on Twitter gave their 2 cents, it's very interesting. I feel like Red Tails, while a very honorable name, that's a lofty, lofty reputation you have to live up to. Those heroes in the war, especially as mediocre as this football team is right now. Last thing you want to do is sully that with something it's going to be tough to aspire to and try to ascend to those levels. I think Red Wolves makes sense, even though there's still a little bit of a thought that there is still a tie to Native American history and Native American practice, and I think that might be a concern as well. I mean, we all know Warriors isn't happening because a lot of people have become their own graphic artists and throwing up their own mock-ups of what they think should be done. Like, for example, if they went with the Red Wolves, you just take the Vince Lombardi 70s yellow Redskins helmet and just change the Indian feathers to a foxtail and just continue with that. But, I mean, I have no preference right now. I mean, just something that won't have to be addressed years down the road. And while this was probably a poor planning for a placeholder, we'll just see what happens. That's going to be the biggest issue, that it was something done that was hastily put together, wasn't thought out well, and you still hear stories that they aren't ready to roll out a new name because they still haven't got the trademarks yet, which is something that they should have done years ago. Even if you never used them, that you hold on to them. That's a big issue, especially I think of there's probably companies that have old expired trademarks or picked up trademarks that they don't use anymore, that somebody else didn't use, but they still hold on to it just for the odds, and maybe they rolled out a different brand that is separate from it or things like that. I mean, I assume that Foot Locker still holds the Woolworths trademark even though they don't use it anymore.
Yeah, now that it's done, I'm happy that they changed it. It's been such a cloud over the team's head for a long time. And whatever the name is, I mean, I'm still going to be a fan of it, so that's not a big deal. The placeholders, they're fine. I've been looking at the photos. I mean, they took the team name off the jersey, and that's an easy fix. I like the numbers on the helmets. I've always been a fan of that kind of thing. So, I don't know. We'll see. I also know, too, that fools rush in, and if it's going to take a while to get the perfect name, then let them take it a while. I mean, it won't matter. And, let's be real. It's not like they're going to be good this year. So this whole season, you just going to have to chalk it up to everyone taking their lumps. And then, hopefully it's for the future, though.
Yeah, and the way it seems like it might take more than just this upcoming season. It might be a whole couple of years before they decide. And maybe it just makes sense. What you do is, if you have the name, just finish the rebrand January 1st. New year, new team name, and things like that. I think the issue is that Daniel Snyder didn't do it because he caved into public pressure. He did it because he saw his money flying out of the window. Yeah.
Well, I guess at the end of the day, whatever it took, and at least that part's changed, and maybe he'll sell the team. I doubt it, but
nah, he's about he's barely 50, and that's probably going to stay in the family probably for a very long time unless they decide it's too expensive to keep, a la the Kent Cooks with the whole estate sale and things like that. But you never know. I would say this, speaking of Washington teams, I would talk about the Wizards. I know recently, actually it was back in during the pandemic and the shutdown in May, the Wizards did a bracket for their all-time Wizards Bullets uniform, franchise history. One of the things I noticed, there were several jerseys that were not in there that were favorites, but the other problem is that it was heavily rigged towards the modern Wizards jerseys, which again, not bad, but seeing that you have 5 or 6 different versions, you have the district one, you have another Wizards alternate, and things like that. I feel like it was heavily rigged, I guess, similar to how they talk about the renaming of the franchise, how that was heavily rigged as well.
Well, let me, it's a coincidence. I think I still have the tab open. Let me share this. This is if they have to go back to the Bullets, they should go back to this one. That's the one they should do, which is a throwback in itself.
Yeah, and I think that is a very good throwback, especially I think of the Jordan years. It's interesting enough that I remember seeing Chris Webber and Juwan Howard play with those uniforms. I was
Yeah,
surprised that in the bracket that they put on Twitter, those late 80s, mid 90s uniforms were not
I
in the
like those.
bracket. Those were clean. They had a
Yes.
perfect look. I feel like, especially once they went to block numbers instead of that funky design they had with the
Yeah.
Muggsy Bogues days, I felt like it was probably the perfect Bullets jersey, especially after years of really inconsistency. Because you think about it, even after they moved from Baltimore, where they were still wearing orange jerseys, they went through a number of jerseys before they went to that red, white, and blue pattern that they used basically in the West Unseld glory days.
No, I would kill for any kind of like late 80s, early 90s Bullets jerseys like that. Give me any of them. Michael Adams, Muggsy, Tom Gugliotta, Calbert Cheney, George Mearson, Legler, just any of them, really. Not even the big guys. I'm not even mentioning like Weber and Juwan Howard and, those guys. Rasheed Wallace for that 1 year.
Yeah, actually on Mitchell and Ness, they actually have
They have a Bullets one, right? I mean, they have the Chris Webber, number 2.
Yeah, the before he got the number from Scott Skiles.
Yeah.
Like right when he got traded for Gugliotta. So that 1 year. And then there was this one place in Baltimore and like in the Inner Harbor, in Harbor Place, where they had a store. I can't think of what it was, but I saw a number 4 Bullets jersey, Chris Webber. And it's like, it was crazy. I could not believe it. They actually had one, because everything else I see is number 2. And it's insane. And I think, wow, that is sort of like the Holy Grail.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the nostalgia. I just I see those jerseys and it takes me back to that time, early '90s. HTS and watching the Bullets play on HTS on like President's Day. That was just the thing you did, and you watched, and those teams that were terrible. Well, I mean, they were scrappy, I guess, but Strickland and Purvis Ellison and all those guys, they still have a special place in my heart.
Yeah, and I started picking up on the team in '93, so it was Gugliotta, Murasan, tail end of Michael Adams' tenure there, Rex Chapman, and then they got Juwan, and then they got Weber, then they got Rasheed, like you said, for the 1 year, and then they got Strickland. Harvey Grant came back, and like I said, that one last run. I think that was the toughest thing, seeing them change to the Wizards design, especially that, I guess looking back at it, it's not too bad, but Abe Poland just went on a whole teal, or I guess it was teal, maybe more turquoise and gold, or turquoise and copper type look for not only them, but the Caps too. I guess you synonymously rebrand things. And Ted Leonsis, he recorrected all those things and went back to the red, white, and blue for both teams.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of people that are more knowledgeable than me on this. If you're on the UniWatch website with Paul Lucas, and there's a couple people on Twitter, I mean, they know better than me about it, but the 2 biggest colors, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s, trendy, was teal and purple. You saw that a lot. The Rockies, Marlins, the Diamondbacks were the best of both worlds. They have teal and purple coming in there. San Jose was hot, those kind of things, and Charlotte. With the Hornets. And the Wizards just kind of rode that thing. I mean, that was the trend at the time. What I appreciate now, what I didn't appreciate when I was a kid, is these really kind of bold graphics that they had, that they really went for. The mountain look for the Jazz, the Raptor for the Raptor, the big old Grizzly in the middle of the jersey for Vancouver before they switched. And, the other one, too, if I can find some just splurge money, I want to get a Mitchell Ness has it, because the ones I see on eBay, I don't know if they're real. Do you remember the Bucks jersey with the big old buck on the front?
The Vin Baker, Glenn Robinson era.
Yeah, that's the one I want. Ray Allen, like his second year. I want one of those.
It seems like Milwaukee really did a big do-over in their jersey, just looking at the Brewers going into '94 with distinct look, and then the Bucks going away from Bango to this more fiercer deer. And it was interesting with that. And then again, the Bucks continuously changed their uniforms over and over, and then it looked like the Brewers did a recorrection as well. They started going back to the blue and going back to the gold and things like that. And initially, you always hear the story about Bud Selig that because the approval and the legal action about the Seattle Pilots moving to Milwaukee took so long, they basically just had to rip off the Seattle and Pilots stuff and basically put Milwaukee in and just put Brewers on all those jerseys, because they were going to go with the color scheme that was red and black and things like that, and they just weren't able to because they ran out of time, because by the time they got the approval, it was opening day of 1970 and there was nothing else they could do, and they just sort of had to stick with those.
Yeah, the Brewers, the uniforms are very unique. Obviously, the M and B to make the mitt thing is the famous logo. And then, you're right, they just said, let's mix it up. In 94, they did that interlocking M and B. And then for that 1 year, they had that old-timey just straight M. And then they went to the M for like Miller for a long time until they kind of dumped that last year. Just going back to the Bucks, when because I'm watching more basketball again, it really strikes me how it just goes in cycles, right? They had that to the 90s. It was like purple and green. And then they, like the Michael Red era, like mid to late 2000s. It was red and green, which is kind of a throwback color scheme to, the Lou Alcindor, Oscar Robertson era. And now when you watch like Giannis and like Chris Middleton, they have that kind of like Sidney Moncrief, kind
Nelson
of square
ones.
pattern.
Yeah, the Don Nelson, Alvin Robertson ones, yeah.
Yeah.
And talking about the M in Milwaukee, that was the M that the Braves used on their helmets when they were in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Just a different color and things like that. I noticed the biggest thing after getting MLB The Show and just going through the different uniform designs that they have for all the teams, even though it's part of their history. You play as the Twins and you play as the Rangers. I was doing like a practice session between those teams. I gave them both the Senators uniforms, variations of Senators uniforms, different style. Of course, when you think about the second go round of the Senators, that's where it feels like the Nationals really took a lot of their
curly W
color scheme. Yeah, the curly W. And of course, with the Twins, basically their logo, if you look at it, if you ever decide to get that game, if you play as the Twins, look at their 59 uniforms, which is Washington, and then put it on their 61 uniforms. It's the same color scheme, same pinstripes, same colors for the script, just Senators and Twins. That's the only difference.
Yeah. Those uniforms before design houses and focus groups, they just kind of kept it simple, really. And you look at the uniforms online, MLB has a database. It's called Dress to the Nines, which actually is the digitized version of this book, and then they have it updated to modern times. Yeah, pretty much everyone kept it the same. It's like home, maybe block letters. You either did block letters across the chest, script letters across the chest, and then you had your city on the away jersey. It was all gray, and that was pretty much it. You had a variation on your hat, basically the first letter of the city that you're in, and that's what you rolled with.
Yeah, unless you're playing in a two-team city where, even then again, you look at the Giants before they moved to San Francisco. That's another thing. And I think about a lot of the interviews I did, and I think about my interview with John Howard, who we both know from our time back at the Daily Times. And we were just talking about how the Mets basically took from both the Dodgers and the Giants and basically put their own spin on the same logo.
That was the heritage. They took the NY style from the Giants and they took Dodger blue and they just kind of mashed it together. But this is a beautiful uniform. This Hank Aaron, like the old rookie Hank Aaron. This is an old Mitchell & Ness catalog I have from 2000 that I still have. But I think you can't go wrong with the classics. And when in doubt, I know just keep it simple, really. Even if it's for a year or two, you don't have to be all razzle-dazzle. And I think it's good, especially if you are razzle-dazzle for a lot of times, then just to throw it back and, go simple with your uniforms. So, I don't know, you think about the Braves really went for it with, speaking of Hank Aaron, with these. And then by the 80s, they'd switch back to basically the early, Tom Glavine and Steve Avery and all those guys. So,
yeah, and I always think one of the most drastic changes, look at the Islanders. The Islanders and that failed Gordon's Fisherman experiment with the jerseys that a lot of people didn't like back at the time, but of course now
it's cool now. The Burger King's jersey, right? The purple. People are into that. The Canucks went back and they threw back to the Flying V jerseys that they had. you go nuts. I mean, same thing. The Penguins are my favorite hockey team, and when they finally went back to the skating penguin, they finally went back to their uniform design when they won the cup in the early 90s with Lemieux finally and Jaromir Jagr. That was a happy day for me. I like that weird kind of Super Mario Power Penguin thing they had in the 90s. That was just never my jam. So I was happy to see the skating penguin back.
It's funny when I think about that. I think of Mega Man. I think of that penguin looks like
that's what it is.
Mega Man, and it looks like a Mega Man villain. And it's still crazy. That is a city, Pittsburgh. All their uniforms are synonymously one color, the gold and the black.
Yeah. Like that Wiz Khalifa song, black and yellow, black and yellow.
I mean, people wouldn't even remember that the Penguins wore blue at one point.
Yeah, the powder and, Pittsburgh was like red and blue for a while. And, as far as I can remember, even some of the other throwback uniforms like the Bumblebee, they've always been black and yellow. So,
you know what? Uniform, I think the city also fits it, except for maybe the Eagles and the Flyers. But looking at the Athletics at one point also had the same color scheme as the Phillies and eventually as the Sixers, even though it looks like the Syracuse Nationals color scheme was basically the same as Sixers. I mean, that's another thing you think about it. A lot of teams move. They don't change the color scheme. They just change the logo and design. They just keep the color scheme and go with it.
Yeah, and who knows? Sometimes it's just easier. And I suppose if you have a winning brand, if your team wins, then you're slow to do that. Eventually it changes, right? I mean, when the Sonics moved, eventually you're going to have a rebrand. Titans, when we talked about, when the Oilers moved over to Tennessee, I mean, you're eventually going to get a change. And some of it's for the good and some of it's for bad. And part of the nostalgia in one is fueled by success, right? I mean, if those Titans teams that McNair had kind of really stunk and they didn't go to the Super Bowl, you probably don't look as fondly back on those uniforms. So, I don't know.
Yeah, and I also think that going back to some of the Philadelphia teams, I think about the Athletics and even to the early part of their Kansas City run, their road jerseys are basically what the Royals use now, but basically they had Athletics basically in red with blue trim, and that was really a nice look. And I think all of a sudden them deciding, on Charlie Finley's whim to go to green and gold, while that is more iconic when you think of that team, I always thought, hey, it'd be nice just to see what it'd be like sort of throwing back to that old color scheme. But, there are plenty of teams, and as we keep going on, I think about the Jazz, and I think about that as well, that they kept going back and forth on colors. They went to the mountain, then they went away from it, then they went back to the original New Orleans purple and gold for a little bit, and then they went to that weird fiery mountain volcano type of color scheme, and then they went back to the Malone Stockton NBA Finals era.
Yeah. But it's funny what winning really changes your outlook, because otherwise, if those Utah teams stunk, well, you look at those mid to late 90s jerseys, no, they'd just be like, they'd be ugly. Of course, I say that, but then I was just pining for those Memphis Grizzlies jerseys, and they weren't very good when they wore those, at least in Vancouver anyway. So, I don't know. I guess everything is just a case-by-case basis.
It's going back to the Sonics for a bit. The 77 to basically 94 look, before they decided to do the rebrand for the first time.
That's the ones where they made the finals run with GP and Kemp. But I like the ones they had before. I mean, that was a great book.
Yeah, the Dennis Johnson, all those ones, because Dennis Johnson, Lenny Wilkins ones. That's all I can think of when I think of those guys. I guess Walt Hazard maybe, but. Yeah, I prefer that design over that 95 one, and then the rebrand with Ray Allen and everybody. I prefer that one. That, to me, is a preeminent Seattle Supersonics uniform.
Yeah.
And, of course, speaking of Seattle, before we get to the Kraken, and just looking at the Mariners uniform, they ended up going back to the same design scheme they went with the Pilots, except maybe it was, instead of it being a sky blue, it's a little more of a navy blue and gold instead of yellow. But basically, what they're sort of doing now with their uniforms, they're going back to a variation of like the late 80s, early 90s Mariners.
Yeah. Like Alvin Davis, Harold Reynolds. It's just a mix. I mean, you want to mix it up. The cynical thing would be like, you got to throw in a little extra, because the look that we kind of know, the Ken Griffey Jr., the teal and navy, I mean, they've had that for about 25, 30 years. So it's just like, if you're a Mariners fan, you have the hat already, you have the jersey, so okay, now we'll introduce the same hat, but we'll use the 80s color style, and then okay, you have to buy another, like, as a collector, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I have to buy another hat then. So that's part of it.
Yeah, and there was somebody else who did a rebranding, I feel like, recently. I know I always go to Chris Creamer's website as well, because that's probably
It's a great resource, yeah.
Yeah, other than UniWatch and Chris Creamer, I can't really think of a lot of other sites that are big into that. Maybe some fan-devoted sites, depending on particular teams. But the Rams did a rebrand, which is sort of like, it's all right.
The Rams and the Chargers kind of a little bit of a throwback to Lance Altworth, but also like the 80s. Well, they had been doing kind of the 80s blue and mustard, Dan Founts and Kellen Winslow, but the football jersey doesn't give me as much nostalgia. Baseball is number one, and now again that I'm seeing some of these NBA jerseys and logos being recycled, I think that's the second thing that's really kind of nostalgic for me. I just get a kick out of like seeing those things, and I'll go on eBay and like let me see, okay, like the champion jerseys from in the day. You're like, okay, let me see, and of course they're all expensive now because there's hipsters who want to wear it to Coachella and stuff. They don't know Cedric Sabalas from Nick Van Exel or whoever. They just want a champion jersey because it's cool. But the champion brand kind of brings me back, and I saw my Michael Jordan jersey that I bought from Champ Sports back in the day. I think right before the 92-93 finals or something like that. I mean, I still have that one. Now I'm on the hunt for just like again, it's just the nostalgia part is just too strong for me, and it's strong for a lot of people, I think.
When I heard that Tampa Bay was rebranding, the Buccaneers were rebranding, I thought it would make sense to take from the Derrick Brooks era, use the flag with the skull and crossbones, but go back to the creamsicle ones, just sort of do a variation of that, white helmet, creamsicle flag, the flag and the creamsicle, if you're not going to do Buccaneer Bruce, but I felt that would have been a better look, especially, and then have that orange. I think they would have been able to pull it off, and of course, Tom Brady would have probably been able to pull it off. I feel like
20 years from now, Mitchell and Ness will probably come out with a Tampa Bay Brady jersey, just like 15 years ago. They had like a Joe Namath Rams jersey, and just like weird, obscure players who only played 1 year, 1 or 2 years with the same team. So that's the thing.
Speaking of players in different jerseys, what is the most jarring scene that you can think of a player that's been long known for one team playing for somebody else? I know some people used to say it's like seeing Willie Mays in a Mets jersey and things like that. And I guess the modern one would be seeing Jordan in a Wizards jersey and things like that.
Yeah. I found it funny that in The Last Dance, they just end it, and it's like, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know that he came back and played for the Wizards. It's just like he retired then, and like just no one ever speaks of the other part. Wow, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of my Rolodex a little bit. Tom Brady would be one. And the NBA, it's tough, man, because everyone moves so much every 2 or 3 years. It's crazy. It really isn't a lot of guys like Dirk who just stayed with the one team. Jeez, who else? I'm trying to think. I'm trying to like.
What about Shaq in a Cavs uniform?
Shaq in a Cavs uniform was kind of weird. Shaq in basically every place after Miami, where he was just really ring hunting. So Phoenix and the Celtics, that was one. Just in the history, Dominique in a Clippers uniform, that was weird. And Orlando. Patrick Ewing in Orlando or Seattle, that was a weird one. I'm trying to think who else. Baseball, it's in my brain, it's there. I just can't verbalize any. But I don't know, like for you, baseball, what's one or two?
I would say Robbie Alomar in a Mets uniform. That's sort of weird.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Honestly.
What about Ken Griffey Jr. for those, like, how long did he play for the White Sox? I mean, that was pretty obscure.
Yeah, they were just collecting all the old veterans, and it's like Jim Thome in a Dodgers uniform, and I mean Jim Thome in an Orioles uniform was sort of.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking about. I mean, not for us, but for if you're a Cleveland fan or somebody like that, that's kind of a jarring one. I don't know, Mike Piazza in that 2 games, I guess, for the Marlins.
Oh man.
I'm trying to think. Well, right. Who does Madison Bumgarner play for now? I mean, that's a little jarring, right?
Diamondbacks, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. That's a little weird.
I'd say Andres Galarraga in a Braves uniform was sort of weird. I mean, years in Montreal, and I know everybody will gloss over like the couple of years in St. Louis, but when I think of Andres Galarraga, I think of Montreal and I think of Colorado, which is crazy that you can say I think of two teams for one guy because he never really stuck around longer than maybe 5 years in a city.
How about Ichiro in a Marlins uniform? That was weird.
Yeah, that was weird. That is just so strange. I mean, I couldn't think of, again, it feels like with the Mariners there's always a reunion with some of those guys. It would have been crazy to see Randy Johnson get one more shot, but he wouldn't have wore 51 anyway because Ichiro was wearing it. So I mean, which is, I always hear the story about Ichiro calling Randy Johnson just to see if he could use the number 51, and and that's crazy. That is Randy Johnson a Diamondback in the Hall of Fame or?
Let me look that up. I'm not sure. It's the Hall of Fame's decision right now, so I don't know what. I mean, he did win a World Series from there. I mean, of course, he was super dominant for the Mariners for a long time. So let me see. Who else? I keep thinking about the people that what ifs. You know, what if Cal had left to go to the Dodgers? And I think what 92, right? I think they were really courting him.
Yeah, I had heard at one point they were talking about trading him to the Blue Jays for Tony Fernandez.
Yeah. Ooh, that would have been weird.
What if Barry Bonds ended up going to Atlanta? I know they were coveting him during that offseason. I know it was them, the Yankees, Barry Bonds in Atlanta. Jeez.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking we did see that. It was the 1996 movie The Fan with Wesley Snipes as a guy who was for the Giants and then went to the Braves. That was Barry Bonds.
I mean, I think Willie Mays Hayes and anything else, but I'm just trying to think. There are probably plenty of people. Some people say, no, Tom Seaver in a White Sox uniform?
Yeah, I mean, it must have been jarring for Mets fans the first time when they saw him when he got traded to Cincinnati. That must have been weird. But let me see. Man, just not coming up. Or for me, just in recent times, right? I mean, you know, Adam Jones spent how many years was he in Arizona? 1 or 2 years?
He was just there for a year, and then he went off to Japan.
That was different. Manny. I mean, that was a little. Maybe that's still too raw. I mean, there's a good obscure one. You know, Manny for that half season with the Dodgers before he left.
Yeah, I always think. I mean, he's not in pinstripes, so I can live with that. You know, out of sight, out of mind. He can't do any damage to you. And the worst thing that could have happened is just seeing him wearing pinstripes repeatedly for 10 years. In all honesty, it'd probably be in 3 years. I wouldn't be surprised if once the Orioles end up becoming competitive again that they make a big splash and get Manny back, and then it's like, hey, how you doing again?
We can dream.
Weirder things have happened. I always assume that's what's going to happen. You know, he can opt out after year 3. By year 3, hopefully the Orioles are on the right track, and then he just comes back, plays third base. That's one problem solved, you know, with all the other things. There are plenty of other jarring things. I mean, well, Grant Hill in an Orlando Magic uniform.
Yeah, you know, that would hit me. Or my two favorite guys from the 90s, MLB, and it hurts because their injuries derailed it or they just didn't reach their full potential. Yeah, Grant Hill and Penny, and Grant Hill in a Magic uniform and then Penny in a Suns uniform for a little bit. That was tough.
I mean, it still hurts Chris Webber in a Kings uniform, but...
And he was good with the Kings. I mean, you know, so...
Yeah. There was someone I was about to say. It would have been like, I mean, other than Frank Thomas and anything other than a White Sox uniform, that was...
Yeah. You know, it's funny. It's just, you know, at the end, you associate guys with one team, and then when it really gets down to the end of the career, and they're just kind of hanging on, it's just they really do become journeymen, right? It's just, you know, the Piazza, I think, you know, okay, he have basically 2 careers. You think, okay, the Dodgers and the Mets, but then, you know, he hung around. He's with the Padres for a little bit and Oakland, right? I think, you know, so it's different. Seeing Tim Lincecum in an Angels uniform for a little bit, that was a little jarring. So, no, man, it's tough.
Yeah, and I also think about the guys that where, you know, they say you can't go home again, but they do, like Maddox back to the Cubs, Glavine and Smoltz back to the Braves, after
Yeah.
that. Palmeiro going back to the Rangers and going back to the Orioles and things like that. And I always look at that, and I know this is a subject that's going to be discussed. Palmeiro should be in the Orioles Hall of Fame. There is no doubt about it. If Brian Roberts is in and he admitted to using steroids, there should be no reason that Palmeiro is not in the Orioles Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Ben McDonald, I think, just tweeted. Was it Ben McDonald or Greg Olson just tweeted about Palmeiro today and just saying how great a hitter he was? So I don't know.
That's a glaring error. I follow Palmeiro on Twitter, and now I sometimes think I probably regret doing that, but still, I think that it is a glaring error, especially when you have all the guys who were sort of the mercenaries, like Alomar, who was barely there for 3 years. Again, Roberts, who admitted to using steroids and things like that. Palmeiro's got to be in there. It's bad enough that now they're just going to basically start getting all the guys from the 2012 to 2016 runs in there, and Palmeiro's a glaring error, and it's huge. Whether he'll come back or not to accept the honor, that's a completely different story. I mean,
are there any other guys from kind of the last 20 years of the Orioles that, besides Palmeiro, that you think that should be in but aren't in right now? I think they got most of them, right?
Yeah, and let's use this 3 years is the minimum, which is because Alomar is basically the standard bearer for that. Right now, pre the 2012 team, I can't think of anybody else. Eric Davis didn't play.
Well, there's not a lot of bright spots from that team.
Tejada maybe, and that's iffy too. That's extremely iffy.
There's another guy.
I'm really trying to think because those rough years. I mean, what Jay Gibbons?
Moore's in, right? Moore's in. Melvin Moore's in.
Yeah, everybody else basically from that time span is in because everybody else from the bad years either have steroids to their name, so Jay Gibbons, Palmeiro, but Brian Roberts is in, and then the next wave is going to be the 2012 team.
2012, yeah.
So that's going to be Marquez, Jones, Tillman, Britton, Jim Johnson,
Jamie Walker, those guys.
Well, Buddy Groom would probably be the next best one because he was actually solid.
JJ Hardy.
Yeah, Hardy. I mean, and then you start getting to, like I said, you talked about the crappy years. Really, the glaring omission is Jay Gibbons, maybe Ramon Hernandez. Those might be very, very tough because everybody else was awful. Jorge Julio, those, you start digging the bottom of the barrel. I mean, Benitez technically could be...
Kevin Gregg, question mark?
No.
Ty Poppington?
The Admiral, I don't know. I don't think Admiral Poppington fits, even though he has been there for 3 years. I mean, Luke Scott technically would probably be a fit for it, but I mean, because he was a tiger killer. Man, he killed the tigers more. Oh, I forgot, Scott Erickson. Scott Erickson is not in, to my knowledge.
He should be in.
Because, everybody else, Jimmy Key was hurt. David Wells was there for a year. Everybody else, Arthur Rhodes. I assume Arthur Rhodes is not in yet. Arthur Rhodes might.
I'm looking it up right now. Let me see.
Unless Arthur Rhodes got in a couple years ago, they've had some years where they haven't had any inductees because they end up doing.
Jeffrey Hammonds. I don't know.
Oh boy, Hammonds. Oh man, he showed that his potential
I liked him.
Once he got it. Yeah, he's Adam Jones. He was Adam Jones before Adam Jones, except imagine Adam Jones hurt all the time. That's basically Jeffrey Hammonds. That's the only thing I can put the best comparison, and I know that's unfair to Jeffrey Hammonds, but Hammonds was a monster. Once he left Baltimore and went to, I think Cincinnati that first go round, yeah, he was a monster.
Brian Roberts was the last player inducted 2018 of this kind of since from 1990 on. Melvin Mora, Gary Renicky, Lowenstein, Robbie Alomar, Musina, Bordick, Richie Dower, Johnny Oates, Ray Miller. Let's see who else. Harold Baines, Greg Olson, BJ Surhoff, Bill O'Donnell. Chris Hoyles is 06. DeSensei, Brady, Cal, Hoyt. Yeah, so Erickson's not in there.
Yeah, and neither is Arthur Rhodes. Arthur Rhodes was a solid pen piece.
He was.
For those 1914 and a pretty solid starter. I mean, at least basically up for 92 to 94, and then he became the bullpen guy. I mean, I think Moyer was there 3 years, so that could also be a reach. But a lot of those guys you named, other than like the mid-90s guys, a lot of those from the 70s and 80s that got in. Other than like,
Well, where's my boy Ben McDonald? Not there.
I'm surprised he's not in. Maybe,
Especially as he's announcing for them now.
yeah, and he was pretty solid. Again, you start reaching the why not thing. Is Devereaux in there? I'm surprised Devereaux's not in there.
Nope.
There were a couple of years they didn't have any Hall of Fame inductions, but Devereaux would have been a fit. Ben McDonald would have been a fit. Like I said, Surhoff's already in. Hey, I'd give Jeff Rabelais. Jeff Rabelais had some key hits, and he fulfilled the 3 or 4 year criteria as an Oriole. Think about his home run off Randy Johnson in the ALDS in '96.
Not on there. There are a lot of guys I have a soft spot for too.
Cheeto Martinez.
Kind of the same ilk though. Where's like Joe Orsulak?
Oh yeah,
he was all right.
Orsulak. I'm surprised Orsulak isn't in there.
I'm surprised Devereaux is not in there.
Yeah,
I guess he only played with them. It wasn't that long. He was there in the upswing, and then he was with the Braves when he was the NLDS MVP. That was already
in '95.
What?
That was '95. Then he came back in '96. So technically, he was there '89, '90, '91, '92, '93, '94, '96. Actually, he might have been there in '97, I think. But still, that's 7 years. 6-7 years as an Oriole, and part of that '89 team had a huge season. 92, 93 in Camden Yards with the 24 homers and 100 RBIs, 107, I think. But yeah, I think really that's huge. And just going through that, there's a lot of former Orioles. Like I said, Erickson, Devereaux, Palmeiro, and then a lot of the people from 2012 on will be in there. Like I said, you already know Manny, Jones, Markakis, Tillman. Oh, George Sherrill. Flat Breezy is not in there. Then again, I don't think he was there 3 years. That could be another reason because Flat Breezy was the guy who got the call when you had no other choice because that team was awful. That and Buddy Groom. From those 05 teams, Buddy Groom, Palmeiro, and Flat Breezy, even though,
Yeah, I'm looking at the rest of the list here, just of like Oriole All-Stars and over the years. And most of the guys, from the last good era, the kind of 2012 to 2016, 2017. They'll be there eventually. The early guys, Jim Johnson, Weeders is going to make it in. Let's see here. Cheryl. Let me see who else is the All-Stars during the lean years. I'm looking. Cal, Tony Batista.
He was there for 3 or 4 years, so
Yeah. Melvin Mora, who deservedly is in there. Tejada. 05 was Brian Roberts, Tejada, Melvin Mora, and BJ Ryan. And that was pretty much it. I'm going to see if there's any other weird. Lee Smith wasn't there long enough back in the day.
I forgot. Technically, he was there 3 years, and I think they both would be a good fit. Malacky and Pete Harnish.
I was going to mention Malacky. He was strong.
Yeah, he was a better pitcher than Jeff Ballard was, and Harnish was there. Was he gone by 92?
I'm not sure.
You start reaching. If you start reaching, then you start, bottom the barrel guys who were not good in Baltimore but ended up being big everywhere else.
Well, let me ask you this, and we'll circle back to the uniform topic. What if you could have like the top 5 Oriole jerseys of your players that you'd want? Like, do you have any specifically? I'll start. Give you some time to think about that. I had the Mitchell and Ness one, but it was just too big. I wouldn't mind having any of the big guys, Palmer, either of the Robinson guys. The 69 sleeveless uniform, they had the vest. I would rock that, definitely. Any, 80s Orioles jersey. I sold my Eddie Murray one from 84, but that kind with a collar, with a kind of the orange collar. That would be another one. I need a Ben McDonald jersey. I don't have a Manny jersey. Maybe I would get the 2012 one. I'm trying to think which ones they had sleeve patches for, because that I like those kind of things. What else? And then Eric Davis, get an Eric Davis jersey. Scott Erickson, those guys. But what about you? Do you have any favorites?
I know a particular design. Of course, the 89 to 94 road jerseys, the gray with Orioles and orange. That's my favorite design.
They threw those back, I think, on the 60th anniversary, I think, of the Orioles. I remember they played the Cubs because they wore the 94 MLB anniversary patch. I'm pretty sure it was 2014 they did that, so.
Yeah, because I remember going to a fan fest and they had a Ryan Webb jersey, and I have that picture, and I'd say that jersey is still perfection. Particular players, I mean, it'd be nice to get a Palmeiro jersey to go with the Palmeiro bat that I have. That'd be nice. I have a Ripken jersey. It's not an authentic Cooperstown one, but it has an 8 on the front, but doesn't have anything on the back. I guess having an Adam Jones one would be nice, and a Brady Anderson jersey would be nice.
I keep looking on checking eBay. I really want one of the heavy duty. Let me see if I have a picture of it. The Orioles 60s heavy wool varsity jacket that they wore. They sold that for a little bit on Mitchell and Ness, and there's a 20 on the sleeve for Frank Robinson. That's one I always am on the hunt for. I like those baseball varsity jackets. If it does pop up eventually, it's 6 sizes too big for me, so I never have a chance to get it, but that's the one I want.
That looks like something they wore in the 90s, too.
That's the wool varsity version, and then the satin ones, you can get that on eBay for $40, $50. It's not too bad, but that's the heavy-duty varsity style one, so.
Yeah, going back to Orioles jersey, I'm glad they did go back to having an orange jersey for end games. So the Saturday night orange jersey, that's great. I know everybody still keeps talking about the Friday night O on the hat, which makes no sense. But I always thought, do what they did in the 90s, maybe orange bill. Because I know once the little span in 96 to 90, maybe 8, where they had the orange bill and they had a funky Scott Erickson version of the alternate black jersey with the Orioles in white. The one they said that basically had just got to the stadium in time when they beat the Royals in a walk-off game in 96. Yeah, I like those, and I like how they had the bird and then they had the orange bill and things like that. I feel like that might be something to go to, but I don't know about the tricolor. I think I'm okay without the tricolor hat again.
Yeah, my favorite Orioles cap probably of all time is the road one. The one that they wore in their heyday is the home end as the hat in, when they won those series in 66 and all that, the cartoon bird, black and the orange brim. I gotta say, I think the home Orioles hat looks the best when it's paired with the Saturday orange jersey. I just like that contrast better. When they wear the white home jersey and the white hat, it's just too much white. I like the contrast and I like how it breaks it up, but if I had to only go with one, and I have 7 versions of that hat, it's the road one for sure. The black and the orange brim with the cartoon. That's probably my favorite one. And then I like the stick bird. I mean, I like them all. They only use that B logo for 1 year, but I like that one. That's pretty solid.
Yeah, and I thought they wore that a bit in 94, 95 when they brought back. They would wear the road Baltimore uniforms at home on Sundays sometimes at 95. I think because I think Mark Smith had a walk-off wearing that uniform.
Mark Smith.
Yeah, I know. I tell you, all the names that pop into your head. That man had clutch jeans all over him, regardless where he was. I remember he had a walk-off in Pittsburgh for the Pirates that night, I think, of that combined Francisco Cordova no-hitter or something for them. But, yeah, they wore that for a little bit, 94, 95, and then all of a sudden when they went to the redesign in 96, or actually 95 might have been. It's weird when you look through all those Orioles jerseys. But wanted to get back to, before we start to wrap up, the Seattle Kraken, and they have released their uniform, pun intended there. What are your thoughts on that? I know especially it seems like everything in Seattle has been basically, aside from the Sonics, is always based on their water history.
It looks okay. I don't have a problem with the logo. I think when I see guys on the ice wearing the uniform, I'll be able to get a better take on it. It looks fine, but I'm just seeing the logo right now. And, it's funny. Somebody was saying that it's kind of funny that they picked the Kraken because, the Kraken is a sea monster. And then, it's just so is it naturally kind of the enemy of the Mariners? They shouldn't get along. Is it weird to have that? So we'll see. The logo looks fine. I know that the nitpickers out there say, it kind of looks like maybe Seagram's or something like that. The S is very similar. I don't know. There's some sort of alcohol company that it's very similar to. But when I see him on the ice and I see somebody actually wearing the jersey or sweater, as they say, then but I don't hate it.
And I think that whole thing got lost. The day that news came out, that was the day the Redskins all of a sudden retired the name.
Yeah,
So that got lost in that. And I had posted, well, while one Washington team doesn't have a name and can't think of a name, the other Washington team actually came up with a pretty sound design and a look and a pretty good name. Totems would have probably, I know the history of the totems, that probably would not fly right now.
I think some people were like, well, is it Kraken to... What is the word I'm looking for? Is the Kraken to now? Like, will the Kraken age well 20, 25 years from now? But, you could say, okay, maybe. But then I'm sure people said the same thing about the Toronto Raptors. It's a direct... Part of it was directly from Jurassic Park and stuff, and people just like it. And obviously it stuck around and no one's changed it, so we'll see.
It could have been like Cthulhu or Chupacabra or something like that. It could have been something weird like that. And I think Kraken is probably a better bet. I mean, especially if you go with Cthulhu, the little bit that I know about Lovecraft, you probably don't want to tie that into to anything, especially knowing Lovecraft's background. But I think Kraken is safe. It goes into mythology. Perfect for that city. I mean, now all they need is an NBA team. They do have a WNBA team. I know everybody keeps getting, a lot of Storm fans were not happy about saying, oh, now all they need is a basketball team. Yeah, they have a team.
Shout out to Sue Bird. # keep Sue fresh. And yeah.
As we wrap this up, what is the best way for people to reach out to you? I know, of course, you're part of the Movies in a Meal podcast that you guys have been gaining a lot of traction lately, it seems.
Yeah, we just crossed over the 100-episode mark. We started in July 2018, and a lot of our success in getting on the platform, has to go to you. It's funny, it's just like we all kind of pass our knowledge down and help each other out. You helped me get started, the Movies in a Meal podcast, and we got that. And, we recently guested on the What You Should Read podcast with our friends Kelly and Julia and Rachel. And, Julia and Kelly were guest stars on our show during our retro reviews, same as you, and that kind of inspired them. So one podcast begets another one, I guess. But we're on Movies in a Meal on Twitter, and trying to be a little bit more active on that. And basically anywhere that you can find probably Earl's podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. What else are we on? Stitcher, iHeartRadio. Yeah, all those things. So, yeah, it's funny. The Spotify we've been on, but it didn't dawn on me the reason why some of the episodes weren't showing is because the format, it just hadn't formatted them in the way they wanted to. But that's straight. And so if you go on Spotify, you can see this. And it's been a good run. In fact, I think probably, I don't know who's going to be on our podcast again soon. It might be you or Eddie, your brother, might be making his debut soon. We have to talk about that. I think we have a movie in mind for Eddie. It's just Eddie, if you're listening, like, we just got to make sure that you don't, if it's the movie that you want and you're okay with just acknowledging that it's a bad movie, and then we can be frank with it. Because if you want to do Sharknado, man, you got to realize it's not an Oscar award-winning movie. So
he would probably pick some other sci-fi network movie like Megalodon versus something. I mean, honestly, really, any shark movie, he's good at any shark movie, any ridiculous movie. Yeah. Don't listen to him to watch Thanksgiving. I'm just putting that out there. No to Thanksgiving as a review. I mean, you might get Mortal Kombat, which again isn't bad, and I know it's back on Netflix.
I would watch Mortal Kombat. I know, Brad is notoriously, well, not notoriously, but Brad is sometimes the most fickle out of all of us, and I know that he would watch it. And Keith, he's a good sport.
It's not number two, basically. It's not number two. That I always remember looking at the IMDb review for number 2, and it started off with the headline, "A Cinematic Fatality." And going through there, we just kept reading, and we just kept continuously laughing for like 15 minutes to the point our stomachs were hurting just by the quotes in there. It is so hilarious how bad it is. I don't know. Steph watched Artemis Fowl, and she was not happy with that.
I've heard nothing but bad things about that movie.
Oh, yeah.
I think, I've been talking about maybe Little Shop of Horrors. I'm telling you, man, if you haven't seen it, I don't know if you get HBO Max or whatever, but You should watch Harley Quinn because JB Smooth is a plant. I know you love JB Smooth, and he's a talking plant in that, and he's hilarious in that. So you should check that, or at the very least, go to YouTube and look up Frank the Plant and Harley Quinn, and you'll be entertained.
I like Ron Funches as King Shark.
He's fantastic. King Shark, the interplay between him and Clayface, like. It's really funny that, those two really have a different take than how they have been in the other universes. And they're hilarious together. Yeah, Ron Funches, like King Shark, like he might be my favorite. He's just hilarious in that show.
Yeah, I mean, definitely looking forward to eventually trying to get it. I know it was on Hulu and they had the episodes up and they just disappeared like that because the Sci-Fi was re-airing them and they were just gone that quickly. But I was hoping to eventually get it. Worst case, I might have to go nefarious means and going to jailbroken fire sticks. I know a lot of people poo-poo that, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
I really can't recommend Harley Quinn enough. I mean, as long as you don't hold the comic book characters in pure kind of nature, I mean, it's super violent and super foul. But the cast, I kind of prefer Kaylee Cuoco over Margot Robbie as far as Harley Quinn. Lake Bell, and the rest of the cast, it's stacked, man. It's Alan Tudyk is the Joker and a bunch of other people. You mentioned Ron Funches. Tony Hale is Dr. Psycho. Diedrich Bader is Batman in this. Yeah. Sanaa Lathan is Catwoman. I'm trying to think who else. The guy who plays Bane, I don't know him, but he's pretty hilarious in that. And Bane's take is pretty funny as well. But I just can't say enough good things about that. It's a hilarious show. And, every episode's only 23 minutes, so you're going to crush through the 13 episodes pretty quickly. Commissioner Gordon is Christopher Maloney, and Commissioner Gordon is, like, on the edge. He's like, what was that Christopher Maloney TV show where he's a cop, but he also sees, like, a imaginary unicorn or whatever? It's kind of like that.
Yeah, I wanted to see that, but I didn't see it before it got canceled, but it's probably out there on Amazon Prime or so.
Yeah, Gordon is pretty hilarious, but let me get the rest of the cast there, but... Yeah, you could piece together a lot of the clips from YouTube if you wanted to. But yeah, they just moved both seasons. They just finished the second season, and that was on HBO Max. Let me see here. Who else?
It's on DC too, right?
Yeah. But, honestly, if you have HBO Max, it's probably better because I don't know if you'd ever get your money's worth. Speaking for myself, getting your money's worth with the DC Comics website app thing. There's not enough there for me, but JB Smooth, Jason Alexander's in this. Tisha Campbell is in this. Let's see here. Who else? Giancarlo Esposito as Lex Luthor. It's all the people you would think. Phil Lamar. Alfred Molina is Mr. Freeze.
Really?
Jim Rash is the Riddler. Howie Mandel's himself, but don't get too attached to Howie. Oh, yeah. I'll just say that.
Actually, I did see that first couple episodes. Yeah, he was barely there, but he was everywhere when you get the content.
Oh, yeah. That's very good. Michael Ironside. I mean, I don't know. We got on a tangent, but just check it out if you can. And somebody has at least that they compile like kind of the best of Frank, so you can just watch that part if you really want. In fact, I'll message it to you when we're off here.
But yeah, Ben, I do appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we got to do this again. I'm looking forward to that movie review, Little Shop of Horrors. I appreciate it, and we'll do it again very soon.
All right, man.